In this video, we're going through 10 different things that's gonna make your Mini 2 footage cinematic. So flying a drone is super fun, but when it comes to getting better looking shots, you don't want to just put the drone up and expect to get the best results. You have to do a few things to be able to get better looking footage out of this drone, and especially with the Mini 2, because you are limited with the footage that you're able to capture out of it. However, with that said, this camera does shoot 4K and 100 megabits, so you can do some cool stuff in post when it comes to color grading. So I just got back from off-roading out in the mountains in Big Bear. A snowstorm seemed to have just hit us at the right moment, and we got some awesome footage just exploring the mountains, going from the desert where it was super bright and sunny and a little bit windy to the snow-capped mountains and everything in between. And on this trip, I shot a vlog and used the drone to get a lot of different cinematic looking shots. So what I want to go through is 10 different ways to get cinematic footage. The first few are going to be focused on how to capture footage. Then we'll get into some ideas around creative control and shot perspectives and things like that. And then the last few tips are going to go through some things to do in post when you're here in editing. And all of this together is going to give you awesome looking footage. All right, so let's get into the first one, which is use manual white balance and lock in your exposure. So when you're flying with this drone, you can go into your menu system in the upper right-hand corner, the 3 dots, and there is a white balance setting, and you can change your white balance underneath the camera setting. Now, you want to lock in your white balance because when you're flying and you have it on auto, the camera is going to decide your color balance. However, when you're shooting, you don't want to have that fluctuation happen in the middle of a shot. So you can see right here, I was shooting in snow and it couldn't decide if the colors needed to be more warm or more cool. And this just causes an issue in post because now I have to go through and color grade these out. So you want to lock in your white balance to whatever makes most sense in the setting that you're in. Now with exposure, you have 2 options. You can either shoot full manual, which you control your shutter speed and your ISO, or you lock in your exposure in the lower right-hand corner. You hit the little lock icon, and then when whatever exposure is currently set, it's gonna lock there until you unlock it. You don't want your exposure fluctuating throughout a shot unless you're going through a scene that's changing light. And very rarely do I want to shoot in that way, but if I was like circling around a car and the sun hits the lens, yeah, there might be some times where I'll just leave auto exposure on. But for the majority of the time while I'm flying, I will lock in my exposure. Number 2 is control your exposure and make it a little bit darker. What I've noticed is that when this camera exposes on auto, it's a little too bright. I always shoot at -0.3, -0.7, or -1. And I've been able to get the best looking footage out of this drone in those settings. If I just leave it to auto at 0, this is the kind of footage that I get. It's a little bit overexposed in certain areas, and it's not as easy to color grade. If I bring down the exposure and lock it in, I can get a much better look out of this camera. And also if you're flying manual and you just want to make sure that if there is anything bright in your image that's hitting at 80% rather than like 90 to 100. Because once you get in that upper range, when you bring it into your editing software, it's much harder to color grade and you actually can't bring those highlights back as much. You kind of lose everything. Even though you have some exposure in those highlights, I've noticed that I've not been able to get very good color grades when I expose a little bit too bright. So err on the side of caution, bring down your exposure a little bit. Don't let your highlights get too close to 100, but at the same time, you also don't want to have too much dark in your image as well. So you got to just play a balance. This camera has 1 color profile, so you really only have this one to work with. There's no log setting. Now, number 3 is use ND filters. And ND filters are basically sunglasses for your camera, and it allows you to bring down your shutter speed so you can get more motion blur in your footage. This is not as noticeable when you're super high in the air, but when you're super close to objects, it'll become more jittery. So using ND filters will smooth out your footage and give you more of that cinematic look. Number 4, you want to show scale, but you also want to fly close to objects. So when you're showing scale, that's when you get further away from the subject, whatever it is that you're shooting, and you want to show everything. You want to show the landscape in the distance. You want to show the horizon. You want to show this thing with this giant perspective. That's the beauty of drones, is you can get these awesome perspectives. Now, at the same time, you also want to fly close to objects. You want to get in there because a drone can give you super stable footage and it can stay in a consistent straight line and give you these shots that you can't do with a lot of other cameras. So this kind of blends into my next point, which is perspectives. And you want to get different perspectives when you're flying. You don't always want to shoot the same angle, the same direction. You want to use your camera in different ways to be able to capture footage. So shoot, straight out the horizon, but then once you're done with that shot, point the camera down and shoot straight down at the ground, and then shoot at an angle. This camera also allows you to shoot up a little bit, so if you get closer to the ground, you can kind of point it up. It will look somewhat like a gimbal, but you can do these bigger sweeping moves than you would be able to if you were running with a camera in your hand. So having varying perspectives is super important, and that goes into my next point, which is sequencing. When you're flying your drone, you really want to think about how these shots are going to play back to back. You want to think story. So how can you best capture the scene from beginning to end, show all the different perspectives, and you get a full picture of whatever it is that you're flying. So for example, it's snowing, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, so I want to show our trucks climbing through the mountains, I want to show the Joshua trees getting covered in snow, and then I want to pull back and get these big perspectives that really show the landscape of where we're at. So a good rule of thumb is go close, medium, wide, and then on top of that, once you have a sequence of shots, think, okay, what are some different perspectives that will really make this situation unique? It could be top down. A lot of times, getting that top down shot will make everything look so cool because drones are the only camera that really allows you to get that kind of perspective. So don't forget to grab these different perspectives and don't forget to think about how the shots play next to each other. Number 7, you want to create contrast with your light. So when I was shooting this scene here, you can see the truck is being blasted with light. But if I flip to the other side, all of a sudden you get this crazy contrast and it just looks more cinematic. This is because cinematic looking footage generally has more contrast in the frame. You don't want to just blast everything with light. So when you're flying, think of, okay, where's the position of the sun in relation to the subject of what I'm shooting? Try to put the sun off to the side. Try to put it at 3/4 that way or 3/4 this way, just so you can see the bright parts and the dark parts of the scene that you're in. And this goes right into number 8, shoot early in the morning or late in the day. And if you could shoot at golden hour, that's gonna give you the most cinematic looking footage. The reason is the sun is low in the sky, so you have these long shadows, and you also have this different quality of light than if the sun is right up above. Like right here, this scene, the sun is right up above and it's just not that exciting. Just everything is being washed with light and shadows are right below. Whereas if you shoot early in the morning or late at night, you get these cool long shadows that give you more of this cinematic feel and everything has this warm glow to it. It's just more pleasing to the eye. And then when you add some of these other concepts to the shoot, all of a sudden you're gonna have really cinematic looking footage. Now, if you're in a scene where there's clouds or like in this situation, it's snowing and it's just kind of all white, then it comes down to more of your perspectives and the way that you're sequencing to get cinematic looking footage. It doesn't always come down to where the sun is because sometimes the sun is covered. But when the sun is out, bright blue sky, try to shoot early in the morning or late at night. Now, number 9 is an editing technique and it gets into color grading. So what I've noticed with this footage is that the midtones tend to ride a little bit hot. So when I'm color grading, what I find is that first thing I always do with this footage is I bring the midtones down and bring my shadows up a tad. And then I'll play around with my highlights depending on the shot and depending on what's in the scene. I found that just doing this tweak alone will make any footage coming out of the Mavic Mini a little bit more cinematic. Everything seems to be a little bit bright. So all you have is this one contrasted look, and you have to play within this contrasted profile. So if you shoot it a little bit darker and then you bring it into your software and bring down your midtones, you'll see all of a sudden that your footage just feels more rich. And for me, this is where I've really been able to get the best look out of this camera. Now, number 10 is another editing technique. You want to stabilize your footage or reframe. So when you're out flying, it's not always perfect. Like look at this shot, for example. It's a pretty cool shot. I'm flying with 2 directionality, flying in as well as I'm turning around the Jeep, but I kind of missed the mark. So I kind of jerk a little bit. You don't want jerky footage. So what I did is I actually stabilized this footage and centered in on the truck itself. And you can see just right here, all of a sudden the footage looks that much better. The beauty is you're shooting 4K, you can crop in a little bit. It's not gonna be the end of the world. Unless you're a pixel peeper and you're really focused on that resolution, the cropping in a little bit on your 4K is not gonna be a problem, and I do it all the time. So you can crop in, you can stabilize, you can reframe, and doing these little tweaks will help make your footage more cinematic because you can really perfect each of the moves that you were trying to do. When you're out flying, yes, you'll get some good looking footage, but it's never perfect. So there's always times where you can go in, tweak a little bit, and all of a sudden, boom, you have amazing looking footage. I'm gonna give you one more bonus tip, and that is start building a library of clips that you think are cinematic and that you really like. So when you're watching another creator, when you're watching a film and you see this awesome aerial shot, what about that shot is so epic? Where's the light coming from? Which perspective is that creator shooting from? Are they straight on? Are they straight down? How is the subject interacting with the drone, and how is the drone moving? Is it in one directionality? Is it fast? Is it slow? And a good practice is to just pull clips and keep a library of these so you can refer to them and start practicing them. Because the best way to get good at flying a drone and get good looking footage is to practice, practice, practice. All right, guys, next I highly suggest you check out this video right here. It is my complete beginner's guide to the Mini 2. So if you're new to flying, this is definitely the video that you need to check out. And down here is another video all about color grading and how to make your Mini 2 footage pop. All right, guys, I'll see you over there.